Welcome to WLX News Now at 10. I'm Mackenzie Martin. We received audio from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources on Friday related to the Nolan Wells case.
Stop. One name changes how you read this. The Mississippi State autopsy on Nolan Wells is finished and sealed. WLBT reported that on 31 July. But almost nobody covering this case has said who is holding it, and that is where the story actually is right now. The office is the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office, and in an earlier case out of that same office, the New York Times and Mississippi Today asked 3 nationally recognized forensic pathologists to review a death that had been ruled undetermined. All 3 disagreed with that ruling. That tells you nothing about Nolan Wells. It is not evidence about his death. Nobody has been charged with anything. What it does tell you is why a sealed file from that office is being watched this closely. Who made the finding, when, and under what conditions? That is the question now. The official state autopsy on Nolan Wells was completed by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on 31 July, per WLBT. The results have not been made public. They are going to a grand jury. So the finding exists, and you cannot see it. Neither can we. The family put its own finding out in the open. The state has not. That difference is not a clue. It is just the shape of the record, but it is a shape that matters. The Wells family commissioned an independent autopsy. The independent autopsy returned undetermined and pending, per ABC News and CNN. It ruled nothing in and nothing out. Undetermined is not a conclusion. It is a category. It means the pathologists could not yet say what killed Nolan Wells, or how. Pending investigation means they are waiting on the same information we are all waiting on. That finding did not settle anything. It opened the door wider. Then the family's attorney Ben Crump said publicly, per TMZ, that somebody is not telling the truth in this case. That is a statement from a lawyer, not a finding from a medical examiner. But it matters, because it tells you what the family believes is happening behind the sealed door. The public statement matters because the official record is not public. So the voices we actually hear are the families, the officials urging caution, and an attorney for one of the friends. That is a strange position to be in. Now here is the record of the office holding that door. In 2021, a man named Damian Cameron died, and the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office ruled his death undetermined. In 2023, the New York Times and Mississippi Today asked 3 nationally recognized forensic pathologists to review that case independently. All 3 disagreed with the undetermined ruling. Not 2, all 3. We are not saying this office got the Cameron case wrong. We are not saying anything about Nolan Wells from that. But it is a documented fact. This office has been publicly second-guessed before, by outside experts, in a case where its finding was undetermined. And now it is holding the only official autopsy finding in a case where the family's independent autopsy also came back undetermined. You can see why people are watching that office. And while the real findings sit in that tension, a fake one entered the conversation. The state's public safety commissioner publicly called a circulating toxicology report a fake, according to WLBT, not inaccurate, fraudulent. This is not a case where the public has too little information. It is a case where the public has information from almost every direction, and most of it cannot be checked. So let's take stock of the actual paper in this case. 1 official autopsy, completed, not public, going to a grand jury. 1 independent autopsy, public, undetermined pending investigation. 1 public accusation from the family's attorney, and 1 fraudulent toxicology report that officials had to publicly dismiss. Not 1 person has been charged in this case, according to NOLA.com and CNN. Authorities publicly cautioned against jumping ahead, and told Newsweek the posting can interfere with the work. But the friends who were on that trip have already paid a price. The young men who were on that trip have reported death threats and harassment online, according to WWL, The Griot, and ABC News. A lawyer for one of them put a formal demand in writing over online claims about his client, according to WWL, The Griot, and ABC News. That is what happens when a case has a sealed official record and a hungry public. So the official finding is not public. The independent finding says undetermined. The family's lawyer says somebody is not telling the truth. The people behind that report are volunteers. According to the organization, their work is not a state finding. But that report contains a timeline, and that timeline is where this case starts to bend. Before we walk into that timeline, we need to make sure we are reading the documents correctly, because the words in them are precise, and the difference matters. We keep using that phrase from the family's independent autopsy, undetermined pending investigation, and it deserves a slower read, because it is doing more work than it looks like. In death investigation, there are two separate questions. Cause of death is the medical one. What physically stopped the heart? Manner of death is the legal one. Accident, suicide, homicide, natural. A drowning can be an accident. A gunshot can be homicide or suicide. The same physical finding can carry different manners, depending on what the evidence shows. Undetermined means the examiner could not answer either question. Pending investigation means they are not done looking. Put together, it is not a finding of nothing, it is a finding of not yet, and here is what we still need. For a mother who paid for her own experts, per ABC News and CNN, that phrase is a door left open. It does not say what happened to her son. It says nobody has proven it yet. That is a hard place to stand. You have a finished report and no answer in it. Now the state's autopsy, per WLBT, was completed by the 31st of July. Completed. That is a finished document. But it is not public, and it is going to a grand jury. Let's put both of those in plain language, because they are doing real work. A grand jury is a group of citizens who review evidence in private and decide whether there is enough to bring charges. The autopsy going there does not mean charges are coming. It means the findings are inside that private process. And a grand jury can take months. Going to a grand jury is not a timeline. It is a process with its own pace. And sealed means closed. Not available to you, not to us, not to the press, until someone with authority opens it. When a document is sealed, it is not just private. It is protected. The people who want to see it, the family, the press, have to make a legal case for it. None of that is an accusation. It is a description of where the paper is sitting. 2 autopsies, both finished, and between them, the public record holds a not yet and a closed door. Then there is the word the Public Safety Commissioner chose. Per the Mississippi Department of Public Safety via WLBT, he called the circulating toxicology report fraudulent. Not inaccurate, not unverified. Fraudulent. In plain terms, that is a claim that it was manufactured. Someone made it up. That is a strong word for a state official to use, and it tells you something about the information environment here. You can check the official autopsies, you cannot. You can check the families, it says undetermined. You can check the toxicology report floating around. It is, per the state, a fake. So every document in this case either says nothing yet, or is closed, or is false. Which brings us to the numbers, because numbers are the one thing in this case that do not care about any of that. According to the tracking data CBS News obtained from the Department of Marine Resources, the vessel left at close to 4:31 p.m. Independent verification of where he was runs out somewhere between 3:23 and 4:27, according to that report via TMZ. Do the subtraction with us. From 3:23 to 4:27 is 64 minutes. That is the window. The report does not pin the sighting to a single minute inside it, and the boat left 4 minutes after that window closed. 4:27 to 4:31. 4 minutes. GPS shows where the boat was. It does not show who was on it. It does not show what happened on the island. It gives us the frame, not the picture. That is the tightest number in this entire case. We are not saying it is an answer. A window is not a conclusion, but nobody, not the state, not the family's lawyers, not the young men on that boat, has explained, in public, what fills those 4 minutes. And the person at the center of that gap is an 18-year-old who went to an island and did not come home. Those 4 minutes are his, and nobody has accounted for them yet. An autopsy is a medical document. That sounds obvious, but it is the single most important thing to understand about this case. A medical examiner looks at a body and answers 2 questions. What killed this person, and how long did it take? Cause and manner. That is the whole job. Everything else, who was there, what was said, what happened in what order, belongs to investigators, not to the ME. The family's independent autopsy came back with a phrase you could read as a dodge: undetermined pending investigation, per ABC News and CNN. But it is not a dodge. It is the most honest thing a medical examiner can write. They looked at the body and could not determine what killed him. Not yet. The word pending is doing real work there. It means the medical finding is waiting on the legal one. The autopsy is not the answer. It is a placeholder that says the answer has not arrived. And the state's autopsy, per WLBT, was completed on 31 July. Its results are sealed and going to a grand jury. Sealed, not released, not explained. So we have two medical documents, and neither one tells us what happened on that island. That is the limit. A body can tell you a lot, but a body cannot tell you who. It cannot tell you why. It cannot tell you what 4 minutes look like from the inside. Now here is where this gets uncomfortable, and it is the reason this video exists. The office that holds Nolan Wells' autopsy has been publicly second-guessed before. Per the New York Times and Mississippi Today, in 2023 they asked 3 nationally recognized forensic pathologists to independently review the death of Damian Cameron, a 2021 case that the state medical examiner's office had ruled undetermined. The reviewers disagreed with that ruling. 3 outside experts, 1 office's finding, and they did not agree. Say that out loud. It is a fact about a different case, a different body, a different family. But it is the same office that now holds the sealed document in this one. We are not telling you that means the office is wrong here. That would be an accusation with no evidence, and we do not do that. But you are watching this case for a reason, and part of that reason is that the public record contains a documented disagreement about this office's work. That is not a secret. It is not a rumor. It is 3 named pathologists, a national newspaper, and a state investigation team, and their findings did not line up. What did that disagreement change? In the Cameron case, the record shows the reviewers disagreed. We are not going to tell you the outcome was overturned, because the facts we have do not say that. What the facts say is narrower and more important. An office can rule undetermined, and outside experts can look at the same evidence and rule differently. That gap, between what one office concludes and what 3 experts conclude, is not a verdict. It is a reminder that autopsies are performed by human beings, and human beings disagree. So when you hear undetermined pending investigation, hear it for what it is: a statement of limits. The medical examiner is saying, the body does not tell us enough, on its own, to close this. And the state's sealed report, going to a grand jury, is the same statement, in a different register. The evidence is not finished talking, which leaves us with a strange situation. We have 2 autopsies and neither one is a conclusion. We have a timeline with a 4-minute gap, and no one who has filled it. We have a commissioner calling a circulating document fraudulent. And we have a family attorney, Ben Crump, saying publicly, per TMZ, that somebody is not telling the truth. Somebody. Not a person. Not a side. Somebody. That word is doing a lot of work, and it is the closest thing to an accusation anyone in this case has made out loud. The limits of what a body can prove have been reached. What happens next does not happen in a lab. It happens in a grand jury room, where the sealed autopsy goes, and where the people who were on that boat will have to answer for what they saw. And that is where this case stops being about medicine at all. So we have the state's sealed report, the family's independent autopsy, and the public record of an outside disagreement with this same office. Let us connect them, because the connection is not what you think. The Cameron case tells us something specific. It tells us that undetermined is not a wall. It is a door that other experts can push on. In 2021, the state medical examiner's office ruled Damian Cameron's death undetermined. Then, as the New York Times and Mississippi Today reported in 2023, 3 nationally recognized forensic pathologists reviewed the case independently. They disagreed. 3 experts, 1 official finding, and they did not match. Now look at this case. The family's independent autopsy per ABC News and CNN came back with the phrase undetermined pending investigation. That is not a conclusion. It is a holding pattern. The pathologists who performed it are saying, we cannot determine what killed him, not yet. The state autopsy, completed by 31 July 2026, per WLBT, is sealed and going to a grand jury. We do not know what it says, but we do know what the office that produced it has heard before, that its finding of undetermined can be publicly challenged. Does that mean the state's report will be challenged here? We have no facts saying that. No one has reviewed it publicly. The grand jury has not seen it yet. But the pattern is on the record, and that changes how you hear the word undetermined when it comes from this office. Here is what else it changes. The timeline. After 27 minutes past 4, according to the report TMZ obtained, nobody has produced anything independently checkable. That is a window of 64 minutes. The departure is logged at roughly 4:30 in the state's own data, per CBS News. So the window closes, and 4 minutes later, the boat is gone. 4 minutes. That is the gap between the last verified sighting and the departure. The report does not say anyone saw him after that window. It does not say no one saw him, it says the window is what it is. And into that gap, the public has poured everything. A purported toxicology report circulating on social media, fraudulent, per Commissioner Sean Tindell, via the Department of Public Safety, through WLBT. The friends on the trip, receiving death threats and online harassment so severe that one friend's attorney sent a cease and desist letter, according to WWL, The Grio, and ABC News. The family attorney, Ben Crump, saying per TMZ that somebody is not telling the truth. Somebody, not a person. Not a side, somebody. Here is what the Cameron record does to all of that. It removes the comfort of certainty. In this case, nobody gets to be sure. The office that holds the sealed report has been publicly second-guessed before. The independent autopsy could not conclude. The timeline has a 4-minute gap. The circulating documents are fraudulent. The harassment is real. The accusation is vague. And no one has been charged, per NOLA.com, CNN, and NPR, with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and the FBI still investigating. So when you hear undetermined pending investigation, you now know what that phrase has meant before from this office. It has meant, the body does not tell us enough on its own, and outside experts have looked at the same evidence and said otherwise. That is not a verdict on this case. It is a warning about how much weight a single official finding can carry, especially when it is sealed, and especially when the people who could speak are being threatened into silence. Which brings us to the grand jury. That is where the sealed report goes. That is where the witnesses will have to speak. And that is where the 4-minute gap either gets filled or it does not. The grand jury is where the sealed report goes. That is the next stage. The state's examination was finished on the 31st of July, has not been released, and is bound for a grand jury, according to WLBT. That is the procedure. A grand jury is where evidence gets presented in private and where a decision gets made about whether charges should follow. It is not a verdict. It is not a finding of guilt. It is a door. Now here is what the record tells us about that door. No one has been charged in Nolan Wells' death, per NOLA.com, CNN, and NPR. The investigation has not closed. Both the sheriff's office and federal agents remain on it, according to NPR. Officials went out of their way to ask people to hold off, according to Newsweek, and said plainly why. Not just mislead, hinder. That is a specific word, and officials chose it. And yet the speculation has already done its work. One of them had his lawyer put a stop notice in writing over what was being posted, according to ABC News. The purported toxicology report circulating online is fraudulent, per Commissioner Sean Tindell. Every piece of certainty the public grabbed onto has turned out to be either false or a threat aimed at a witness. So the grand jury convenes. The report goes in. The witnesses speak, if they can, under the weight of everything that has been said about them online. And the 4-minute gap, the window between the last verified sighting and the boat's departure, either gets filled or it does not. That is what comes next. But here is the thing about what comes next. It will not feel like closure. It will feel like procedure, because that is what it is. And the people who have already decided what happened will not be satisfied by a sealed report and a private proceeding. They will want the certainty they have not been given. The Cameron case tells us why that certainty is dangerous. In 2021, the same office ruled Damian Cameron's death undetermined. Per the New York Times and Mississippi Today, 3 nationally recognized forensic pathologists reviewed the evidence independently and disagreed with that ruling. The official finding was not the last word. It was challenged, in public, by people with the credentials to challenge it. That does not mean the office was wrong in that case. It does not mean it is wrong here. It means the word undetermined has a history, and that history belongs to this office. So when the grand jury finishes its work, and the report comes out, if it comes out, you will hear the word again. Undetermined, pending investigation, and you will have to decide how much weight that word carries, knowing what you now know. But before you decide anything, remember the person. Nolan Wells was 18. On the 4th of July 2026, he went on a boat trip to Horn Island, Mississippi. 2 days later, per CNN and Dwellox, his body was recovered. 18 years old. A boat trip, a disappearance, a recovery, and then a sealed report, a grand jury, a 4-minute gap, and a public that filled the silence with fraud and threats and certainty. His mother, Christine Wansley, does not have the report. She has an independent autopsy that could not conclude, an attorney who says somebody is not telling the truth, and a grand jury that has not yet spoken. She has the waiting. And while the rest of us argue about timelines and toxicology and which story is real, that waiting is the only fact in this case that has not been disputed. An 18-year-old went to an island. He did not come home, and the document that might explain how is finished and sitting somewhere she cannot reach. That is where this case stands. The report is sealed, the grand jury is next, and the person at the center of it all is still just waiting. When that jury speaks, her waiting either ends or it begins again.